morning, all. You're listening to 399 FM, Athens Forum Radio, coming to you from the Agora. The time is 16:01, and you all know what that means. So, prepare your minds for expansion and fix your sight on that eternal truth and beauty for which your soul longs. Sit back, relax, and listen closely, because it's time for that granddaddy of philosophy, the ultimate learner, the ugliest and therefore most beautiful man in the world. You all know him, and we all love him. It's time for Dialogues with Socrates.
Thank you, Plato. Great guy, that Plato. I doubt any of you would be able to hear this learner if it weren't for him. Well, folks, it's time for another journey of knowledge, this time on the path of enlightenment. Today, we have two very special guests. All the way from the English Enlightenment, we have the author of two treatises on government and an essay concerning human understanding. He's a founding member of the British Empiricists and the father of liberalism, John Locke.
Good morning, Socrates.
And on the other side of our conversation today, premier member of the European Enlightenment, sometimes Swiss, sometimes French, is the author of Emile, The Social Contract, and many more great works, Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
Bonjour.
Gentlemen, you have both been very active in many of the same fields. Both of you are founding thinkers of social contract theory. Both of you have written on human nature, and both of you are active political thinkers. Today, in the short time we have, I would like us to discuss three fundamental elements of both of your philosophies that I think have been quite influential and informative: human nature, property, and government. Are we all ready?
Let us begin.
Oui, Socrates.
Now, human nature has always been an interesting subject to me. I have had several previous dialogues on this topic, particularly my recent series with good Phaedrus. John, you recently wrote a discussion on human nature, describing something you called the state of nature. What is the state of nature?
The state of nature is man without the social and political alterations to his nature that civil government and society affect. It is a description of the rights and responsibilities that men possess in this unaltered state, where he is bound only to the laws of God. He is set here for the purpose of survival.
What are the implications of this?
You see, Socrates, God made us. We are his workmanship and exist at his pleasure. We've all been set in the same world with like faculties and are thus equal. We cannot be made subordinate to one another. Another man cannot forcibly remove or alter our life, liberty, health, or property. These are natural rights, and it's nature's law that these cannot be taken away by another.
Would you agree with this definition of the state of nature, Jean?
No, I would not, Socrates. Monsieur Locke has made several mistakes in his description of l'état de nature. It is not merely a description of the rights and responsibilities of man. It is a period in development of man where he is most free and at his best. It is the state between the primitive nature of l'animal and our decadent quote-unquote civilized culture. This is the period where man is best.
How is that, Jean? How is this in-between state the best?
It is the period of the greatest happiness, the most freedom, the highest virtue. One need only look to the noble savages to observe this truth. They are motivated only by l'émoi de soi. Self-love. In this state, man is good. That period is the use of society, and any progress since then has merely led to the degradation of our species.
It seems you are suggesting this primitive state is a utopia. Do you mean this?
It is the best, if that is what you mean. When men come into contact with one another and settle together, their happiness is impaired, and they are corrupted by jealousy. The best society is one where men can live apart and support themselves.
But that is not reality. That doesn't exist anywhere.
It does among the savages.
I disagree. All peoples live in a society. Society is necessary for the development and education of man. Man cannot live alone.
If this is the case, John, then what is the purpose of considering the state of nature?
We consider the state of nature not to learn what society should look like, for the state of nature is not the most desirable, but to find the natural rights in nature's laws. From that point, it is possible to reason out the proper function of government.
It is ridiculous. L'état de nature is, by its very essence, the desirable society. What is natural is best.
Would you then suggest that we ought to return to this society?
No, of course not. It is impossible to return entirely to this desirable state. We have unfortunately reached a stage of development where it is impossible for men to sustain themselves with their own efforts and must rely to be codependent with one another. The state is necessary to govern this codependence, but it violates man's innate freedom. What we must do is reconcile the natural freedom man innately possesses with the authority of the state.
As much as I hate to interrupt this invigorating conversation, that music means it's time for a break. We'll be right back after this. And we're back, folks. That was a very interesting advertisement. Definitely check that one out. We're here with Enlightenment philosophers John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, discussing human nature, property, and government. When we left off, Jean had made the claim that the purpose of our study of the state of nature was to reconcile man's natural state with the necessity of government. What is your thought on this, John?
I agree with Jean on this one, Socrates. The purpose of our study is to reconcile natural rights with government. However, I think Jean has missed an important part of the discussion.
What is that, John?
You did not discuss why government was necessary, just stated that it was.
Well, why is government necessary, John?
Government exists to govern the state of war that exists between men when they come into contact with one another. Now, I go into greater detail on this topic on the second treatise of government, but I'll give the short of it here. The state of war is when one man tries to deny the natural rights of another. This can occur when a man tries to enslave another, removing his liberty. It could be when a man tries to kill another, his life, or when a man tries to take a man's property. Now, in the state of nature, it is up to the injured and his own to avenge this injustice. This usually is extreme, and it in turn violates the rights of the offender. Governments are formed to govern and civilize these states of war and to protect the three natural rights: life, liberty, and property.
Now, I find it interesting that you include property in your list of natural rights. How is property a natural right man possesses?
Oui. Could you explain what you mean by this, John? Property is, after all, the foundational evil of society. It is what makes men unequal. Recall from my discuss on the origins of inequality, you are undone if you once forget that fruits of the earth belong to us all, and the earth itself to nobody. Property is an impossibility.
I believe we are using the term in different ways. Unless I am mistaken, you are referring to property as a physical element only. You are saying how can a man look at a wild apple tree and say, that tree is mine? Now, in this aspect you are correct, he cannot. However, if he planted that apple tree, cultivated it, kept it free of pests, pruned it, put his own labor into it, he can truthfully say that that tree is his, because his labor made it. It is his property, his rightful dominion.
But how could a man own land? I grant that if a man took wood and made a carving, that would be his carving. But how could a man ever possibly own land?
If we followed the same principle, then he must be able to. Say a man came to a forest, overgrown and wild. That man, with the tools he purchased, used, and maintained, cleared that forest with months and years of work. That man removed all the stumps, plowed the land, and irrigated it. Can another man then come and say, let me use this land, it belongs to all of us? No! That would be the height of injustice. That first man, with the labor of his hands, shaped and made that land into its form. That is how land comes into be one's own property.
What's your reply to this, Jean?
Well, it is a convincing argument. I still must insist that property is an evil and impossibility if all are to be free. To be free is to be equal, and property increases the inequality amongst men. Thus, it is a violation and contradiction of our natural state, freedom. However, I must insist that we return to your assertion as to the purpose of government, for I believe it is flawed.
Let us do that, John.
And we will, right after this short commercial break. Goodness, that is a ridiculous product. I don't generally say that about sponsors, but boy, was that a stupid product. I mean, who in the world would need to develop an immunity to hemlock? Anyway, when we left off, we were about to jump further into the topic of government. If we can, I'd like us to discuss a little bit about the structure of government, as well as its purpose. I believe Jean was about to give a definition as to the purpose of government.
Oui. As I was saying, government's purpose is not noble. Government is an enforcer of the inequality and exploitative social relations in our world. It does exist, and continues to exist, to prevent the state of war, but only by continuing the oppressive, unequal class system that it currently possesses. We must reform the government to maintain the freedom man possessed in his natural state, while also protecting him.
How can this be accomplished?
So the same means your essence has discovered. Democracy.
Now, democracy is rather dangerous, is it not? There's a great danger in inexperienced and immoral men leading the state.
That is where you are wrong, mon ami. Democracy is the only safe way to govern effectively. Remember, men are good. It is merely a corrupt society that injects evil. If men are allowed to return to a more natural state of freedom, the general will shall guide them on the path that is right.
That's very optimistic, isn't it? What will occur if someone disagrees with the general will?
They shall be first to be free. While some men might not see the truth and good path, with all men giving their voice, the true path shall appear, and will walk upon it.
That is highly unlikely. Would it not be more likely that the rotten elements would drag the pure elements downward, rather than the other way around?
You forget man's nature, which is practically good.
What is your thought on the issue, John?
Well, while I agree that there must be a democracy of some sort, I strongly disagree that all should participate in the system. There are many men who do not have the knowledge or capability to participate meaningfully. This general willing you speak of, Jean, is hardly concrete or evident. Like Socrates said, the rotten elements would drag the pure down. Thus, only those who are capable should participate.
How would you identify these people?
There are a variety of ways you could do this, but the way I would suggest is to only allow those men who possess property to participate. This would ensure a dedication to maintaining a primary purpose of government, the protection of property.
How would you protect from abuse of power by these property owners?
Well, I would suggest a separation of powers within the government, so no one person or group of people, no matter their power, could control all the powers of the government.
That is a very interesting idea. But unfortunately, we're out of time for this quarter hour, and must depart. Thank you both for coming. I hear that you have big things coming up shortly.
Yes, I have a tour coming up in the American colonies. I have a lot of fans there who have been doing great covers of my work, so I'm looking forward to that.
Fantastic. And you, Jean?
I have a rally I'm attending in Paris. It's supposed to be a big one. The king and queen are heading it, so it should be a lot of fun.
That is wonderful. Best of luck to both of you. Well, folks, that brings us to the end of that dialogue. Very interesting, informative stuff. The Enlightenment. What a time. They remind me of myself in my prime. Well, as you've all heard, I won't be here next week. I'm being hauled in front of the tribunal on some ridiculous charges that had led to the Athenian defeat last year against Sparta and Persia. It's stupid. Shouldn't be a problem. I'll be back before the next week is out. Until then, Plato will be filling in for me. Remember, we know nothing, and never shall without others. Keep talking.